64 years old, a geology degree from the University of Texas, and 35 years reading fault lines, pressure zones, and mineral deposits across the western United States. And somehow, I never saw the one forming right underneath my own roof. That is the part that stays with you. Not the fire. Not the forged signatures. Not even my son standing in our driveway at 3 in the morning with ash on his jacket and tears that came just a half-second too late. What stays with you is the geology of it. How something can shift for months underground before the surface shows a single crack. How the most dangerous faults are the quiet ones. The ones that look, from every angle, exactly like solid ground. My name is Dale Whitmore. I am 64 years old, retired, and I live on 300 acres of hill country land in Kerr County, Texas, that my grandfather built a life on, and my father refused to sell even when times were lean and the offers were generous. I spent 35 years with the United States Geological Survey, reading the earth for a living. I know what lies beneath things. I am very good at it. I was just not, as it turned out, paying attention to the right things. My wife is June Whitmore. She is 60 years old, former real estate attorney out of San Antonio, 28 years of practice before she retired the year before I did. She is the kind of woman who reads 3 documents simultaneously and remembers the footnotes. She is the kind of woman who, when something does not add up, does not panic. She opens a file and starts taking notes. I knew this about her. I had known it for 31 years of marriage. I just did not fully understand what it meant until a Tuesday night in September when she pulled me out onto the back porch and told me quietly that our son's girlfriend had asked about our geological survey 3 times over dinner, and that she had already started recording. Our son is Travis Whitmore, 33 years old, software engineer, lives in Austin, about 90 miles east of the ranch. Good at his job, sharp with numbers, got his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which is a combination that has caused problems for him his entire life, in ways I mostly sympathized with because I understood the mechanism. He called us in early September, first time in almost 2 years, and said he was coming home for a long weekend. Said he was bringing someone. Said her name was Amber, and that we were going to love her. We did. Or we thought we did. I am still not entirely sure what the correct verb is for what we felt about a person who turned out to be someone else entirely. Amber arrived on a Friday afternoon in a white rental car, which I noted because Travis had always driven whatever truck he could borrow. She was in her early 30s, dark hair, easy smile, the kind of compose that reads as confidence until you spend enough time around it and start to wonder if it is something else. She brought wine and a peach pie she said she had made herself, and she asked June about the herb garden with what seemed like genuine interest, and she asked me about the ranch with what seemed like genuine curiosity. Seemed. That word is doing a lot of work in this story. Dinner was good. The hill country in September still holds its heat into the evening, and we ate on the back porch with the lights strung overhead and the sound of the creek running somewhere below the south pasture. Travis talked about a project he was finishing. June talked about the fall garden. Amber asked questions and listened well, which I appreciated because I have never had much patience for people who ask questions and then look at their phones. It was after the second glass of wine that she asked about the geological survey. She was looking out at the dark line of the ridge when she said it, casual as weather. She asked whether the survey on the property was current, said she had read that mineral rights in the hill country had been getting more attention lately. Said she was just curious. I told her the last survey was done in 2009, that it had not shown anything worth getting excited about, that the ranch value was in the land, and the water rights, and the 3 generations of family stubbornness that had kept it together. She laughed at that, said it was a good answer. Travis changed the subject to college football, and the evening moved on, and by the time we cleared the plates, I had mostly filed the question away, as the kind of thing a curious person asks when they are sitting on a dark porch, looking at 300 acres of Texas hill country at night. It is a reasonable thing to wonder about. A lot of people wonder about it. June refilled everyone's glass and did not say a word. 2 hours later, when Travis and Amber had gone to the guest room and the house was quiet, June came and stood next to me at the kitchen sink. She did not look at me right away. She dried a dish slowly, the way she does when she is organizing something in her head, and then she set it down and said, quietly, that Amber had asked about the geological survey 3 times. Not once. 3 times. The first time at the table, the second time when they were looking at the property map I keep framed in the hallway, and the third time when she and June were washing the first round of dishes and Travis was outside with me, checking the fence line along the north pasture. I had missed the second and third times entirely. June set down the dish towel. She said she had started recording when Amber asked about the property map. She said it in the same tone she uses to tell me the coffee is ready. Then she went to bed. I stood at the kitchen sink for a while after that, looking out at the dark pasture and the ridge beyond it and the sky over the hill country that is so full of stars on a clear September night that it seems almost unreasonable. I thought about fault lines, about how they develop over time, deep underground, invisible from the surface, stress accumulating along hidden plains until the pressure finds its release. A geologist knows that the surface is almost always the last place the truth shows up. I should have gone to bed. Instead, I stood there and started thinking about what was underneath. A fault line does not announce itself. It builds. Quietly, incrementally, one small displacement at a time, until the accumulated pressure has nowhere left to go. I spent 35 years teaching that principle to junior geologists who wanted to find the drama in the earth. The drama was never the event. The drama was everything that led to it. The 3 months after Amber's first visit were a fault line building. Travis started calling more frequently. Not every day, nothing that would have raised a flag on its own, but where we had gone weeks without hearing from him before. Now he called every Sunday without fail, and sometimes Wednesday evenings too. The calls had a particular shape. He would ask about the ranch, about how things were running, about whether we had thought about what came next. He asked once, carefully, whether we had updated our estate planning recently. Said a friend had gone through a difficult situation with his parents' property, and it had made Travis think about how important it was to have everything in order. I told him our affairs were in order and changed the subject to the fence line along the north pasture that needed replacing before winter. After I hung up, I sat with the feeling that the conversation had been about something other than what was said. I am not a suspicious man by nature. 35 years of field geology teaches you to trust data over instinct, to follow evidence rather than hunches. But I had also spent those years learning to notice when the surface reading and the subsurface data did not match. Travis's calls did not match. June listened to me describe this over coffee one morning without saying anything for a long time. Then she said that Amber had stopped by the previous Tuesday while I was in Kerrville picking up supplies. Just passing through, heading back to Austin from a weekend in Fredericksburg. Wanted to return a pie dish she had accidentally taken after the first visit. June had invited her in, made tea, and they had sat at the kitchen table for 40 minutes. I asked what they talked about. June said Amber was very interested in the history of the property, how long it had been in the family, whether we had ever had it formally appraised, whether the mineral survey from 2009 was the most recent one on file. June said Amber asked these questions the way a person asks questions when they already know the answers and are checking to see if you know them too. I asked June whether she had recorded the conversation. June looked at me over her coffee cup and said she had started the recorder before she opened the front door. I drove into Kerrville the following Monday and went to the county clerk's office on Water Street. Public records are public. That is the thing about them. I sat at the records table and went through the property file, and about 20 minutes in, I found what I had not been expecting. 3 weeks prior, someone had accessed the geological survey records and the property deed documentation for our 300 acres. The access log showed a name I did not recognize, and a notation that the request had come through a law firm based in Houston. I wrote the name down. Victor Sells. I drove home and ran the name through every professional database I still had access to through my old USGS contacts. Victor Sells was not an energy attorney. He was not a real estate attorney. He was a mineral acquisition specialist, a particular kind of lawyer who exists in the space between what land is worth on paper and what it is worth if you know what is underneath it. 17 years assembling mineral rights packages across West Texas, the Permian Basin, and more recently, the Hill Country. 14 acquisition deals in the past 3 years alone. I searched his firm against Texas Secretary of State business filings and found Crestfield Energy Partners LLC, registered in Delaware, Houston mailing address, formed 14 months prior, listed agent, Victor Sells. I cross-referenced Crestfield against every geological survey filed in Kerr County in the past 2 years and found one, filed 11 months ago. Property described in the filing covered 300 acres on Ridgeline Ranch Road. Our 300 acres. The estimated subsurface resource value listed in the preliminary filing was between $150 and $200 million. I closed the laptop and looked out the window at the south pasture, where the late afternoon light was coming through the live oaks in long horizontal lines, the way it does in October in the Hill Country. 300 acres my grandfather had bought for next to nothing. 300 acres my father had held through 2 recessions and a 4-year drought. $200 million underneath the dirt, and nobody had told us. Except somebody had figured it out and sent a woman named Amber to our dinner table to ask about geological surveys in a tone calibrated to sound like casual curiosity. I found June in the herb garden along the south wall of the house, on her knees doing the slow, deliberate weeding she does when she is thinking through a problem. I sat on the low stone wall and showed her what I had found. She read it twice, pulled a weed. Read it a third time. She said, without looking up, that she had already contacted an old colleague in San Antonio 2 weeks ago, a real estate attorney named Margaret Osei. She had asked Margaret to quietly research whether any transfer documents or power of attorney filings had been initiated against the Whitmore property in the past year. Margaret had not found anything yet. She said yet with an emphasis I recognized from 31 years of marriage, as meaning she expected that to change. I looked at my wife on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds with the focused patience of a woman who had spent 28 years reading contracts for a living, and felt something settle in my chest that was colder than fear and steadier than anger. Something that felt like pressure that has been building for a while and has just found the first small crack through which to move. I asked her how long she had known. She said she did not know anything yet. She suspected. She said those were different things and that she intended to keep them different until she had enough to act on. She pulled another weed. The afternoon light moved through the live oaks. Somewhere below the south pasture, the creek ran on, indifferent to all of it. 3 weeks later, our house burned down. June always said the land tells you the truth, if you know how to listen. That July night, it screamed. 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because the clock on my nightstand was the last thing I saw before the smell hit me. Not smoke exactly, not at first. Something older than smoke. Something that smelled like the earth itself burning, like the dry hill country summer had finally reached a temperature it could not hold. I was out of bed before I was fully awake, the way you move when 35 years of fieldwork has trained your body to respond to environmental signals before your brain catches up. The hallway was already thick, not impenetrable, but moving fast in the direction of impenetrable. I got to June's side of the bed, and had her up and moving in the same motion, no discussion, no questions. We had talked about fire before, living where we lived, in the hill country in July, with the grass cured yellow and the humidity sitting in the low single digits. We had a plan. The plan was the north window of the bedroom, the low roof of the back porch below it, and the ground from there. June went first. I handed her down and followed, and the roof section held long enough for both of us to drop to the grass below. Dale landed hard on his left arm. June came down at an angle that was wrong for her right leg and made a sound I will not describe except to say, I knew immediately. It was not a sprain. We got away from the house. That is the only way to say it. We moved across the grass until the heat at our backs decreased to something that was no longer immediate. And then we stopped, and turned around. The house was gone. Not going. Gone. The fire had the kind of confidence that comes from a head start, from being well established before anyone knew it was there. 3 separate sections of the structure were fully involved. The north end of the main room, the kitchen addition on the east side, and the equipment room along the west wall. I stood in the grass with my left arm already swelling, and June leaning against me with her weight off her right foot, and I looked at those 3 separate involvement points and felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with the smoke. No natural fire starts in 3 places simultaneously. Not a grass fire jumping a line. Not an electrical fault propagating through a wall. 3 separate ignition points burning with equal intensity at 2:17 in the morning means 3 separate ignition points were set. I had written enough geological survey reports to know how to read a site. I read this one in about 45 seconds. I called 911 from the grass while June sat on the ground and held her legs still with both hands and did not complain once, which is its own kind of terrifying if you know June. The dispatcher told me Kerrville fire was 12 minutes out. I told her to send law enforcement as well. She asked why. I told her to look at the address and send it anyway. Travis called 4 minutes after I hung up with the dispatcher. He said he had seen something on the news about a fire in our area and had been trying to reach us. He said he was already in the truck and heading our way. He asked if we were safe, and his voice had the particular quality of a person performing worry with just slightly more effort than genuine worry requires. I told him we were out of the house and waiting for the fire department. He said he would be there as fast as he could. Austin is 90 miles from Kerr County on a good day with no traffic. At 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday in July, it is a 90-minute drive at speed. The Kerrville Fire Department arrived in 11 minutes. The first sheriff's deputy arrived in 19. Travis pulled his truck through the gate at the end of the ranch road 38 minutes after he called me. I am a geologist. I work with numbers and distances and physical realities. 38 minutes from Austin to Kerr County is not a calculation that works. I stood next to the deputy and watched Travis's headlights come down the ranch road, and did that calculation 3 times and got the same answer every time. He was already on his way before he called. Travis came across the grass fast, and the embrace was genuine enough that I did not say what I was thinking. He held on longer than he usually does, and his shoulders were shaking, and I stood there with my burned arm and let him hold on because some part of me still needed that to be real. June let him hug her too, standing on one foot in the grass with the house burning behind us, and her face over his shoulder was the most unreadable thing I have ever seen in 31 years of marriage. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. The EMT who looked at my arm said 2nd-degree burns on the forearm, possible fractures in 2 fingers, and asked how I felt. I told him I had felt better. He had the good grace to leave it at that. They put June on a gurney for her leg, which she objected to with the focused energy of a woman who had places she intended to be. I climbed into the ambulance behind her and they closed the doors and we started moving down the ranch road toward the highway, and the only sound for a moment was the equipment and the road and the fading noise of the fire we were leaving behind. Then June found my hand in the dark. She said, quietly, that Travis had called her 2 hours before the fire, not texted. Called. Said he was worried about us. Said the ranch was getting to be a lot for people our age to manage. Said maybe it was time to think about simplifying. She said he had used that word specifically, simplifying. I looked at the ambulance ceiling. She said there was something else. She said that 3 days ago, while I was in Fredericksburg at the hardware supply, a man had come to the ranch and asked to speak with the property owner. June had spoken with him through the screen door. He had introduced himself as a notary from Kerrville and said he had documents requiring signatures from Dale and June Whitmore. June had told him her husband was unavailable and asked him to leave the documents. He had said the documents required both parties present and that he would return. He had not returned. The ambulance turned onto the highway. Behind us, 300 acres of hill country dark except for the glow of what used to be our home. I stared at the ceiling and thought about notaries and documents, and a son who was already in his truck before our house was fully burning, and felt the fault line I had been standing on for 3 months finally, completely, give way. A geologist reads the earth. Layers of sediment, pressure zones, mineral deposits sitting patient in the dark for 10,000 years, waiting for someone with the right instruments and the willingness to look carefully. From a hospital bed at Peterson Regional Medical Center in Kerrville, with a burned forearm, 2 cracked ribs I had not noticed until the adrenaline wore off somewhere on the highway, and both palms wrapped in white gauze, I read the ash. The doctor was thorough and young, and had the expression of a man who wanted to tell his patient to rest, and had already intuited that the patient was not going to do that. He told me the burns were 2nd degree. The ribs would heal on their own, and the fingers on my left hand were bruised but not broken. He told me to stay in the bed. I told him I would do my best. June was across the hall. Hairline fracture of the fibula. Grade 2 ankle sprain. Mild concussion she was arguing about with focused precision. I could hear through 2 open doorways. The nurse who checked on me shook her head when I asked, and said, "Your wife is very determined," which told me everything I needed to know. Travis sat in the chair by my bed for the first hour. He had ash on his jacket that I did not think was from our fire, given the timeline, but I did not say that. He asked questions and held my good hand, and his eyes were red in the way that could mean crying or could mean a person who had been awake since before 2 in the morning managing a situation they had helped create. I answered his questions and watched his face and said nothing about notaries or the mathematics of driving from Austin to Kerr County in 38 minutes. After Travis left to get coffee, I called Robert Chin, an old colleague from my USGS years, who now consulted for the Texas Railroad Commission. He called back in 22 minutes. Crestfield Energy Partners LLC had filed a preliminary natural gas exploration claim against our 300 acres 11 months prior. Estimated subsurface resource value between $150 and $200 million. The filing was sitting in the pending review queue, waiting for one thing: clear title transfer to an entity with rights to authorize exploration. Without a title transfer, Crestfield could not move forward. With one, they could begin within 30 days. I put the phone down and looked at the ceiling. Our family attorney called 4 minutes later. Gerald Park, semi-retired, 63 years old, has handled the Whitmore family's legal affairs for 19 years, without once asking an unnecessary question. He said he had been contacted that morning by the Kerr County Recorder's Office regarding a document filed at 8:03, a quit-claim deed, transferring the Whitmore Ranch property from Dale and June Whitmore to Northgate Land Holdings, LLC. Both signatures present. Notarized 3 days prior by a Kerrville notary named Paul Greer. We had not signed anything. I asked Gerald to pull the document and describe what he saw. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the signatures were very clean, confident, the kind a person makes when they have signed their name 10,000 times without thinking about it. He said he had seen forged signatures before, and these were not the work of an amateur. I asked him what Northgate Land Holdings LLC was. He said he was already looking. Delaware registration, Houston address. Registered agent, Victor Sells. I put the phone in my lap and looked at the gauze on my hands. The notary who had come to the ranch 3 days ago, the one June had turned away through the screen door, they had not needed us present after all. The signatures had already been prepared. The visit was a formality meant to cover the timeline, and when June had sent him away, they had filed the documents anyway and trusted that no one would look too carefully too quickly. Travis came back with 2 cups of coffee and set one beside me. He asked if I had managed to sleep. I said I had been making some calls. His expression shifted in a way that lasted less than 1 second before he smoothed it back into concern. But I had spent 35 years reading surfaces for a living, and 1 second was enough. After he left again, I called June's room. She picked up on the first ring. I told her about the quit-claim deed, about Northgate Land Holdings, LLC, about Victor Sells as the registered agent on both Crestfield and Northgate, the same man, 2 shell companies, one for the mineral extraction and one for the title transfer. A clean 2-part mechanism that only required our signatures on a document we had never seen. June was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had something to play for me. She said she wanted me to understand she had not mentioned the recordings earlier because she had needed time to know what she had. She said she had 47 audio files totaling just over 23 hours of recorded conversation going back 6 months. She said she had been waiting for the right moment to bring them to an attorney, and that the right moment had apparently arrived somewhat ahead of schedule. She held the phone to her recorder and pressed play. Travis's voice came through clearly. Then, Amber's. They were in our kitchen, from the ambient sound of it, during one of the evenings when June and I had stepped outside after dinner. Travis said the signatures were clean. Amber said Sells had confirmed the notary owed him a favor. Travis said that once the deed transferred, there was nothing the old man could do about it. His voice was low and certain and completely without hesitation, and I lay in the hospital bed, listening to my son discuss the theft of my family's land, in the kitchen where I had eaten breakfast for 30 years. Something in my chest went very quiet and very cold. June came back on the line. I asked her how long she had known for certain. She said 4 months. She said she had spent those 4 months building a file. She said she intended to use it. I looked at my bandaged hands on the white hospital blanket and thought about what it takes to bring what is buried to the surface. Some things require patience. Some things require the right instruments. Some things require a retired real estate attorney from San Antonio who starts recording before she opens the front door. June made 3 phone calls from that hospital bed. I want to be precise about the sequence because the sequence mattered. Each call was a pressure point. Each one made something crack. She did not ask my opinion before she made them. I want to be precise about that too. 31 years of marriage, and I understood, lying in that bed with gauze on my hands and the ceiling of Peterson Regional above me, that my opinion was not the relevant variable. June had been building toward these 3 calls for 6 months. She had the files, she had the contacts, and she had the particular focused energy of a woman who has been patient for a very long time and has just been given permission to stop being patient. The first call was to Margaret Osei in San Antonio. Margaret had been June's colleague for 12 years before June retired, a real estate attorney with a reputation in Texas legal circles for being the person you called when the situation was both urgent and complicated. June had already briefed her twice in the past 2 months. Margaret had the file. She knew what was coming. When June called and told her the deed had been filed that morning, Margaret said she would have an emergency injunction request in front of a judge within 2 hours. She said it the way a person says a thing they have already prepared for, which is to say without any drama at all. The second call was to the Texas State Bar. June filed a formal complaint against Paul Greer, the Kerrville notary whose name appeared on the forged deed. The complaint alleged that Greer had notarized signatures on a document without the presence of the signatories, which is not a gray area in Texas notary law. It is the kind of violation that results in license suspension pending investigation, which means the notarized document loses its legal standing while the complaint is under review. June described this to me afterward in the tone she uses when explaining something she considers self-evident, which is a tone I have learned over 3 decades means she identified this mechanism months ago and has been waiting to deploy it. The third call was to Agent Dana Reyes at the FBI Houston field office. June had contacted Dana Reyes 2 weeks prior, after the night I had found the Crestfield filing and come to find her in the herb garden. She had not told me about that contact either, for the same reason she had not told me about Margaret or the recordings. She was building a case, and cases built in sequence hold better than cases assembled in panic. Agent Reyes had been waiting. When June called and said the fire had happened and the deed had been filed, Reyes said she had been hoping it would not come to that, and that she was activating the file immediately. June sent the encrypted package of 47 audio files while she was still on the phone with Reyes. 23 hours of recorded conversation, 6 months of careful documentation, delivered from a hospital bed in Kerrville to a federal field office in Houston in the time it takes to press send. I watched my wife make these 3 calls from the chair beside her bed, my bandaged hands in my lap, and felt something I can only describe as the geological equivalent of watching a structure you built 30 years ago hold weight you never anticipated it carrying. She was methodical. She was unhurried. She was, in every observable measure, a woman who had already lived through the worst of this in her head months ago, and was now simply executing the plan she had prepared for it. Travis arrived at June's room at 2:15 in the afternoon. He had changed his jacket. He had 2 cups of coffee from the hospital cafeteria, and the careful expression of a man managing several things simultaneously behind his eyes. He set the coffee down and asked how June's leg was, and she told him the fibula fracture was minor, and the concussion was being overstated by the medical staff, and he laughed in the way you laugh when you need the mood to be lighter than it is. He stayed 40 minutes. His phone buzzed twice while he was there. The first time he glanced at it and kept talking. The second time he glanced at it and went still in a way that lasted just long enough for me to notice. And then he smoothed his expression back and said he needed to step out and make a call. He was back in 8 minutes, and something had changed in his face in those 8 minutes. Not dramatically, just a settling. The way a structure settles when a load it was not designed for has been applied. He said his goodbyes carefully and left. June looked at me across the 2 cups of coffee Travis had left behind. She said that Margaret had called while Travis was in the hallway. The emergency injunction had been granted. The quitclaim deed had been frozen at the Kerr County Recorder's office at 11:47 that morning. The notary complaint had triggered an automatic hold on Paul Greer's commission pending investigation. And Victor Sells had been served with a federal subpoena at 2:15 in the afternoon, according to Agent Reyes, while he was having lunch at a restaurant in downtown Houston. I thought about Victor Sells sitting in a Houston restaurant, fork in hand, being handed a federal subpoena. I thought about the 2 years of preparation that subpoena represented. The shell companies, the geologist hired to survey our land without our knowledge, the paralegal recruited to impersonate a girlfriend, the notary who owed a favor, the meticulous construction of a mechanism designed to transfer $200 million worth of mineral rights through a family's blind spot. I thought about the phone that had buzzed in Travis's hand, and the 8 minutes he had spent in the hallway, and the way his face had looked when he came back. He knew. The plan his partner had built across 2 years had collapsed in 4 hours, and he had walked back into that room and said his goodbyes carefully and left. And he did not know that the woman in the hospital bed had been the one who collapsed it. June picked up her coffee. She looked out the window at the hill country afternoon, the cedar and the limestone, and the late summer sky, going gold at the edges. She said, quietly, that we needed to talk to Travis. That it needed to happen soon, before he had time to construct a position. I said I agreed. She said she wanted to do it together. I said I had not planned to do it any other way. She nodded and drank her coffee, and did not say anything else for a while, and I sat beside her in the late afternoon quiet, and thought about pressure points, about how the right force, applied in the right place, at the right moment, does not require drama. It just requires precision. June had always been precise. A fire investigator looks for the origin point, not the damage, not the spread pattern, not the char depth on the ceiling beams. The origin, the place where it started. I had spent 2 days in a hospital bed thinking about origin points, and on the evening of the second day Travis came back and I asked him to sit down and close the door. He came in at 6 in the evening, after visiting hours had thinned the hallway to quiet. June was in the chair by the window. I was sitting up in the bed. Travis looked at both of us and something in him understood, the way structures understand load before they show the crack, and he sat down. I did not use the recordings right away. I asked him first. I told him I needed him to tell me what he knew, and when he knew it, and how far in he was, and I told him I was asking once before other people started asking. His jaw worked. He looked at his hands. He looked at June. June looked back at him with the expression she uses in courtrooms, which is to say no expression at all. He told us. Victor Sells had contacted Travis 14 months ago through a mutual connection in Austin's investment community. Sells had presented himself as a land rights consultant with information about a subsurface resource claim on the Whitmore property. He showed Travis the geological survey, the resource estimates, the legal mechanism. He told Travis that a title challenge was coming regardless, that cooperation would result in a negotiated settlement before anything became public. $3 million. All Travis had to do was facilitate introductions and provide access. Travis said he had told himself it was a business arrangement, that the land would change hands one way or another, and the family would be compensated either way. He said Sells had told him nobody would get hurt. He said those words with the hollow precision of a man who has repeated them to himself so many times they have lost whatever weight they once carried. Amber had been Sells's arrangement entirely. Her real name was Lauren Voss, a former paralegal from Dallas with 2 prior fraud convictions that Travis said he had not known about. Sells had briefed her on the family and coached her on what to ask. Travis said he had believed, or chosen to believe, that she was simply gathering information. He said those were different things. I told him I knew. I asked him about the fire. He went still. Not the 1-second stillness of a man managing his expression. A longer stillness, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper. He said he had not known about the fire. Sells had told him the deed transfer was proceeding through legal channels. He said he had received a call from an unknown number at 2 in the morning telling him there had been an incident at the property and that he needed to come. He had not asked what kind of incident. He said he had not wanted to know. I looked at my son and ran the data the way I had run data for 35 years. The stillness was real. The not wanting to know was real. The $3 million and the Sunday phone calls about estate planning were also real. What I was looking at was not a mastermind. It was not an innocent man either. It was a 33-year-old who had made a calculation about his parents' land and his own future and had been wrong about everything, including who he was dealing with. That is not evil. It is something harder to name and, in some ways, harder to forgive. June spoke for the first time. She said, in the tone she reserves for things that are both obvious and necessary, that Travis was going to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. That he was going to tell Agent Reyes everything he had just told us, in the same sequence, with the same detail. That he was going to do this voluntarily and immediately, before Sells had time to establish a narrative that made Travis the primary architect. She said this was not a suggestion. Travis nodded. He looked like he had aged 8 years in 40 minutes. Victor Sells was arrested the following Thursday at Houston Hobby Airport with a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands and a carry-on bag containing 2 laptops and 3 external drives. Lauren Voss was arrested the same morning in Dallas. She took a plea deal within 72 hours, trading her testimony against Sells for 18 months. The trial lasted 4 days. Travis testified on the second day, 3 hours on the stand, answering every question without hesitation. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false instruments, forgery, and arson in the first degree. After the verdict, Margaret leaned across the gallery rail and told me there was one more thing. She said during the sentencing phase, when Sells's attorney had argued his client was acting in good faith to recover legitimately disputed mineral rights, Margaret had submitted a single document to the court. A mineral rights registration filed with the Texas General Land Office 11 months prior, 1 week after Crestfield Energy Partners LLC had been formed, protecting the subsurface resource rights of the Whitmore Ranch under the name of June Ann Whitmore. Sells had spent 2 years building a mechanism to acquire rights that had been legally protected before he had taken his second meeting. I looked at June across the courtroom. Sells had turned to look at her when Margaret's document was entered into the record, and they held that look for a long moment. Then the judge called the room to order and Sells turned back to face the bench. June did not turn away for another 3 seconds. Then she looked at me, and the corners of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, and did not need to be. I asked her that night when she had filed the mineral rights registration. She said the day after Amber's first visit. I thought about a woman who had started a recorder before opening her front door, contacted a federal agent 2 weeks before the fire, and locked our mineral rights 11 months before a man who spent 2 years trying to steal them ever understood what he was dealing with. I thought about fault lines, about how the most dangerous ones are the quiet ones, about how solid ground is rarely where you expect to find it. Nobody tells you what rebuilding looks like. Movies give you the montage, the dramatic moment where the protagonist surveys the wreckage and sets their jaw and the music swells, and the next scene is everything restored and better than before. What they do not show is the Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the verdict, when you are standing in what used to be your kitchen, looking at a concrete foundation that has been poured clean and smooth and smells like new beginning, and you feel nothing in particular except tired and glad to be standing on solid ground. That is what rebuilding looks like. It is mostly just showing up. The insurance settlement came through in September. The legal settlement from the civil suit against Crestfield Energy Partners LLC, Northgate Land Holdings LLC, and Victor Sells personally came through in November. I will not tell you the exact number. Margaret told me it was the largest mineral rights fraud settlement in Kerr County history, which is a distinction I did not seek, and would have happily returned in exchange for not having had the experience that produced it. What I will tell you is that the new house went up on the same foundation as the old one, same orientation, same view of the south pasture from the back porch, and that there was enough left over to do things to the property my grandfather had wanted to do, and my father had wanted to do, and I had always meant to get around to eventually. The house was finished by the end of October. We moved back in on a Saturday with Travis's help, which he had offered the week before without being asked and without making it into anything more than an offer. He showed up at 7 in the morning with coffee and work gloves and did not say much beyond what the work required, which was exactly right. There are conversations that cannot be had all at once. There are things that have to be rebuilt, the same way a foundation gets poured, in stages, with adequate curing time between them. Travis came back the following weekend, and the one after that. He did not ask permission and did not announce himself. He just showed up on Saturday mornings and found something that needed doing and did it. The north fence line that I had been meaning to replace since spring. The equipment shed roof that had needed new sheeting for 2 years. The irrigation line along the east pasture that had been losing pressure since August. He worked without commentary and left by late afternoon, and called on Sunday evenings the way he always had, except the calls were different now. Shorter, sometimes. More honest about what they were, which was 2 people trying to find the distance back to something that had been damaged, and was not yet repaired, and might not ever be fully repaired, and was worth working toward anyway. I answered every call on the first ring. June answered every call before it rang twice. She is a better person than I am. She always was. I just did not know the full extent of it until I watched her build a federal case from a kitchen recorder and a 31-year marriage's worth of paying careful attention. Victor Sells received 14 years. His attorney filed an appeal that Margaret described as ambitious, by which she meant it was going nowhere. Lauren Voss served 11 months of her 18-month sentence and was released in the spring. I do not know where she is and have not tried to find out. The 3 men Sells hired to set the fire received sentences ranging from 8 to 12 years. Paul Greer, the notary, lost his commission and received 2 years of probation. The Texas State Bar published a formal opinion on the case that June told me was being used in notary certification training across the state, which she mentioned with a satisfaction she did not try to disguise. The deferred prosecution agreement for Travis required 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory counseling with a licensed therapist in Austin. He completed the first 100 hours by December. His therapist, from what Travis has said in the Sunday calls, is direct and does not allow him to be comfortable in the ways he needs to stop being comfortable. I consider that money well spent. In January, June planted the herb garden back. Same location along the south wall, same varieties, lavender and rosemary and sage, and the lemon thyme she had brought from a nursery in Fredericksburg the year we retired. She worked through a cold morning on her knees in the dirt, the ankle fully healed by then, and when I brought her coffee, she did not look up immediately. She was doing the slow, deliberate thing she does when she is thinking, and I sat on the low stone wall and waited, and after a while she sat back on her heels and looked at the planted bed, and then looked at me. She said it looked right. I said it did. We sat there for a while in the January hill country morning, the air cold and clean the way it gets after a good rain, The live oaks along the ridge holding their leaves the way live oaks do through winter, stubborn and green and quietly permanent. Below the south pasture, the creek ran over the limestone shelf, the way it has been running over that limestone shelf for longer than anyone in my family has been here to hear it. 300 feet below where we were sitting, a natural gas deposit worth somewhere between $150 and $200 million sat in the dark, the way it has been sitting since, before there were people in the hill country to want it. It will still be there long after we are gone. We have not decided what to do about it yet. Margaret says there is no hurry. June agrees. I have learned, over the past year, to trust their judgment on questions of timing. On a Sunday evening in February, I sat on the back porch of the new house with a cup of coffee and looked out at the south pasture going gold in the late light, and thought about what my grandfather had built here, and what my father had kept, and what June and I had nearly lost and had not lost, and what Travis was slowly, imperfectly, genuinely working his way back toward. I thought about geology, about the difference between damage and destruction. Damage is what happens at the surface. Destruction requires compromising the foundation. The foundation of this place, the 300 acres, and the family that has stood on it for 3 generations, had been tested by something designed specifically to destroy it, and it had held, not without cost, not without fracture, but held. That is the only thing I know for certain about solid ground. You do not find out what it is made of until something tries to take it from you. If this story reached you in a place that matters, we would be grateful if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, it costs you nothing and means more than you know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. The ranch is still there. The gas deposit is still there, 300 feet down, patient as geology. And so are we. That is the only foundation that matters.